the scene, the moment that lends Yosef his nickname, Yosef HaTzadik, the moment that we all can identify with. Yosef is alone, facing his master's wife, facing the tantalizing, seductive opportunities, facing the taivos that all men possess. But it's not just sexual. Taiva is never just physical. That's what makes it so compelling and so difficult to overcome. It's so important to trace the psychological root. Sometimes the roots are very different, just like in a field. The root of an herb or of some weed could be very, very far from where the weed emerges from the land. And in our psyche, the psychological foundation of our sins and our failures and our weakness could be very different than their mode of expression. You have to know the psychological underpinnings. That's as you grow older, you learn about yourself better and your wiring better. So Yosef had lived a very difficult life. He was a person of talent, he was a person of dreams, a person of charisma, roasachav batzon. He shepherded his brothers. He had a pizzazz and style. He had a cachet to him. He was always attracting people's attention with his dress, with his personality, even in jail, even in prison, even in his indentatured apprenticeship in his master's house in Mitzrayim. Bound for glory. Knows he has talent, but just no one acknowledges it. We all know that feeling when you feel that you have a message and you have something to deliver to whoever. It could be at a grand scale in the public or in the privacy, and just people don't see it, people don't get it, don't get you. That's a very moral moment. Do you crash the party and force your way through and trample on people and make sure that you deliver what you have to deliver with aggression, or you're happy and content with your own self, your own relation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, your own family life, your own pursuit of personal excellence, and you don't have to be acknowledged or accepted or admired. But it was hard for Yosef, and he was betrayed, stabbed in the back, et tu Yehuda, et tu Judah, and sold as a slave, very lonely, very abandoned. And here's his opportunity. Finally, someone gets him. And that someone is a woman. And there's something very basic in the male ego, in the male psyche, that responds when a woman admires you and looks up to you. It's built in. HaKadosh Baruch Hu built that into our relationships, our dynamics, our sexual interaction. It's something which HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to, of course, use as part of the engine that drives healthy marriages. So Yosef felt good about himself. And it's not just a woman. It's a woman who represents his ticket to the top. This is his chance. There's a continuation to this story. This isn't just a one-moment affair, a one-moment event, a one-moment. This is his opportunity to strike up a relationship with his master's wife. Presumably, we now know how the rest of the story goes. They'll conspire. They'll feed Potiphar some hemlock in classic Shakespearean fashion. He'll die, and now Yosef will assume control, stewardship of the home, of the manor, of the mansion, and he'll receive all the political title of his master. And he will fulfill all those dreams in the beginning of Vayeshev. So there is a lot of psychology at play. It's a lot more than just sexual desire and taiva. It's a lot more than that. So the big question is, how does Yosef withstand the pressure? What is his strategy? You need strategies for a Yitzhahara. You can't just oppose it. Human nature is weak. Human nature is frail. Our moral conviction is brittle. We know what's right in the tranquility of our own thoughts. As the Mesilas Yesharim says, Shelo b'shas ma'aseh, when we take moral accounting and consider moral options. But in the heat of the moment, under stress, under duress, we lose our courage, our conviction, our discipline, our sanity. So how does Yosef withstand this moment? And he may be Yosef a tzaddik, but even a tzaddik needs a helping hand. And Chazal say he got a helping hand by looking in the window and seeing Demus Diokno Shel Aviv, seeing the image of Yaakov peering in at him. This is a very psychologically pregnant medrash, Rashi. Was it a supernatural apparition where Yaakov came looking at Yosef, or was it Yosef projecting his own image and thinking about his father and the relationship? It doesn't make a difference. Either way, perception is reality, he saw Yaakov. And by seeing Yaakov's face, he was able to pull himself together and withstand this assault. Which means that in life, we need moral role models. It's one thing to think in abstract about what's right and what's wrong. But we all know, think about the last time you failed morally, religiously. Did you forget what is right and wrong? Or did you know what is right and what is wrong, but you failed to execute properly? There's an execution gap between what we know and how we act because we're weak and we cave. We cave to pressures, we cave to needs, we cave to exigencies, we cave to entropy, the easiest route out of a pickle, out of a difficult situation. We take the easy route rather than the difficult route. We discount ourselves. And also because traits are very abstract, they're very context-specific, many traits. Every trait has a positive moment and positive expression. There's no trait that's toxic. There are traits that are very dangerous. Hakina, hatava, v'hakavod, b'sinas adam in olam, but kinas sofrim tar b'chachma. There's a time to be jealous within reason. Taiva, of course, within a marriage, there's meant to be physical attraction, and kavod has a place. It's impossible to think about a trait that has to become maybe gaiva, maybe kas, as the Rambam writes in Achos Deos, but even there, not everyone agrees with the Rambam that gaiva should be completely expunged and completely annihilated from the human emotional landscape. So to read in a sefer about what midos are appropriate and what are not, it's impossible for every sefer to detail and to delineate every single context. And also we're all brilliant in justifying why that midah doesn't really apply to me right now. Find a million different reasons. We're all Einsteins when it comes to providing excuses and self-justification. A moral role model lives the trait in the flesh. You see that person behaving with that trait in context. And it is infinitely easier for you to mimic that trait when you are mimicking someone else's behavior, not reproducing their behavior, but approximating their behavior, borrowing their behavior, being inspired by their behavior. My Rebbe, Mori Rabbi Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, once told us that you must find a moral role model. He taught us this lesson. And when you face a moral challenge, I don't just mean large challenges, moral calculus. I mean, even day to day, you're angry, you have a taiva, you're jealous, whatever, you're petty. Don't think in theory how you should respond or behave. Think how that person would. I don't know if he quoted this message about Yosef, but in my mind he did. So that's enough. I don't think he quoted it, as far as I recall, or at least in this context, but I think I heard it from him in this medrash. It's interesting because when he said that, we immediately, at least most of us in the room, looked at him because he was so morally impressive in his moral behavior, his moral conduct, and just not one part of personality and human experience that we didn't feel that he was working to perfect and to improve upon. And we asked him, who was your moral role model? And we expected him to say, of course, the Rav, Soloveitchik, his father, who else? And he didn't. He said his moral example, his moral beacon, was Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. Now, I had the privilege to meet Rav Aaron Soloveitchik in the end of his life. I sat in his shiur. One thing was clear to me. He was an older person who had already suffered from a very debilitating stroke, but one thing was clear to me. This was a moral hurricane. I mean, the moral willpower, the moral strength, it was clear, it was obvious. It was indomitable. So, in life, it's supremely important to find moral role models. I teach a lot of kids, a lot of 18, 19-year-olds, and they ask, how do you acquire this trait? How do you acquire that trait? And the real answer is migrate, associate with people who possess that trait, and you're likely to be infected by osmosis to pick up that trait. We pick up traits by living with people who display those traits and behave based on those traits. It's very, very hard to read about a trait and actually implement it without seeing it in the flesh. And it's so important when you pick friends, to pick friends not just based on cool and wealthy, but people who shared interests, but people who possess the traits you want to try to absorb, you admire, you aspire towards. And that's the well-known medrash of Yosef looking in the window. There is a different strategy he adopts, and it's even more simple than looking at a moral role model, but it's a strategy we don't implement often enough. The medrash says, let me pull out the medrash here. Medrash says that Hayam Ra'av Hayanos, when Am Yisrael reached the Yam Suf, the waters of the Yam Suf ran away, fled from the Jewish people. B'schus Vayazov Bigdo Biyada Vayanos, because Yosef ran away from Eshes Potiphera. Sometimes you have to run away. And I don't just mean running away in the actual term, running out of the room, that too, but drawing red lines and avoiding encounters. You would think that, after all, we're all Jews who like to filter what this world provides, and we're confident, and we want to try to bring light to this world. So maybe there's a different story here in Parashat Vayeshev. If you and I were in the story, maybe we would say, well, this is Eshes Potiphera. She's obviously an errant person, but there's a lot of good. She has a lot of potential. So this is a great opportunity for me to sit down with her and inspire her, help her reform her ways, and strike up a conversation, have some coffee, and teach her, teach her some shiurim, send her to some podcasts, and let her listen to See the Light. Or maybe meet her and filter out what she can provide. And yeah, but one thing leads to another. And sometimes you just can't trust yourself to filter. And you have to build boundaries. You have to build walls. You have to run away. And I think that in certain circles in today's Jewish world, we're not really good at that. We're not really good at building walls and drawing red lines and running away because it sounds cowardly. And we don't like to imagine ourselves as cowards because we want to filter and incorporate and assimilate and synthesize rather than build walls. At the end of the day, everyone has to build a wall. The question is, how high is your wall? How many doors and windows do you put in the wall? But everyone has to build a wall, especially if you live in a foreign culture, foreign influence. So Yosef runs away. And the impression of the Medrash is, had he not run away, maybe he would have fallen victim to her seduction, to her demands. So sometimes we have to run away. And those are Yosef's two strategies. Thousands of years later, there were two other Yosefs who found themselves in similar situations as Yosef, and they hatched different strategies for avoiding this terrible chait. Their stories are quoted in Avos Rav Nassan, and I just want to describe their story because they're two contrasting stories. One is the story of Rabbi Tzadok, and Rabbi Tzadok was the Gadol Hador, and he was actually, in this case, taken hostage, sadly enough. Again, in those days, hostage-taking was for profit. It was a business. It was very commonplace. Certainly throughout the Middle Ages, Jews were very popular targets to be taken hostage because Jews and Jewish communities around the world could be counted upon to redeem. Every Jewish community had a Pidyon Shvuim fund. Again, right now in 2024, Tafshin Peh, we're living through the trauma of our 101 hostages. Currently, as I record this, we're still in Oz. I hope by the time you listen to this shir, many of them will have returned home already. So he was taken hostage, and he was in a compromised situation. And his matron, the person who was holding him and keeping him against his will, capturing him, sent him a very pretty woman, Shivcha Achas Yafa. This is an Avos Rav Nassan Perak Tes Zayin. So he sat the whole night and he looked at the wall, so you shouldn't see her and shouldn't be attracted. And he learned and he davened, which is fairly conventional and understandable. And the next morning, she went back to this Roman woman who owned Rabbi Tzadok as her slave, and she complained, like, what do you mean? I wanted to fulfill your wishes, and he spurned me. So this Roman woman who had captured Rabbi Tzadok calls him in and asks him, Mipnei ma lo asisa im isha zos kiderech sheyasu b'nei adam. Well, you're not a red-blooded Israelite. You don't have any attraction for the opposite sex. Why didn't you? So listen to his response, and the response doesn't seem like he's just trying to push her aside and give her some answer. It sounds like this is part of his thought process. He responds, Ma asa, mikahuna gedolani, I'm Rabbi Tzadok, I'm a Kohen. I guess he was a Kohen also, just like Tzadok HaKohen Milublin. Mimishpacha gedolani, I come from a prestigious family from the Jews. Marti shema avo aleh v'rabeisi mamzerim b'Yisrael. Namely, he took the high road. He didn't describe this woman as ugly and as rima v'tolea and as dust and ashes. He was, this is a pretty shivcha, and I understand what you're saying, derech b'nei adam, but I have so much potential, and I have so much expected of me, and I come from such a prestigious family, and for a moment or a few moments of pleasure, I'm going to surrender all of that and forfeit all of my dignity and nobility and my calling and my family's pride and my family's honor. And as I mentioned a few weeks ago, well, actually it wasn't placed on the website because it was the Vayeshev year. This was actually the Musar strategy of the Slobodka Yeshiva. The original Musar movement was very reductive. Life is dark, life is empty, life is meaningless, life is confusing, life is a maze, life is too complex and complicated for people to crack and to decipher, and therefore you should engage as little as possible and disassociate with the world. And that was a very powerful message in the 19th century, before the world started to permeate every nook and cranny of our experience. And to a degree, and I'll skip ahead, I'll get back to Tzadok, this sounds like the strategy of Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva was also in a similar situation. Now, in Rabbi Akiva's case, he wasn't taken captive. Rabbi Akiva was a dignitary who was hosted by the Romans. Rabbi Akiva was always part of the Jewish delegation during those very dark years between the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash in 70 CE and the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 130. During those 60 years, the Jews were in a very vulnerable state, and they always had to travel to Rome by ship to plead their case and plead their needs before the Roman Caesars and emperor, and Rabbi Akiva was always part of that group. So he was hosted as a dignitary, as a diplomat. So what do? They sent over food and wine, and they sent over women. And so this wasn't someone who was a captive. This was someone who was a dignitary. And again, the psychology is very different. A captive doesn't have the confidence to resist. So that's what made Rabbi Tzadok's case so impressive, because the master could have persecuted him, killed him. Rabbi Akiva is under their diplomatic protection, but he feels honored. He feels that it's not Rabbi Akiva, but obviously other dignitaries. So this is how they're treating me. I should show them my gratitude. I should partake. I'm an important person. Anyway, so they sent two women, and they're quote unquote chasing Rabbi Akiva the whole night. Not chasing, but soliciting. And he's sitting on the side, and he's spitting. And why is he spitting? Well, we find out about that later. Because these two women, who were sent to Rabbi Akiva, go and complain to the woman who was hosting Rabbi Akiva in her house, or the man who was hosting Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva was asked the same exact question as Rabbi Tzadok. They're not pretty, they're not human beings like you, you're disrespecting them. Hashem created you, Hashem created them. What's the difference between you and them? And Rabbi Akiva said, yeah, Maaseh. Reichan ba'alai mi basar nevelos v'trefos v'shratzim. Yeah, these women are disgusting to me. They're repulsive. They may be attractive now, but they're just fleeting beauty, dust and worms. And when I look into their future, Rabbi Akiva took Mesilas Yesharim's approach. And for many people, Mesilas Yesharim's approach and the classic Musar approach. But as the world became modernized and modernity became not just dangerous and frightening, but also it enhanced life and offered opportunities that weren't available before, there was a need to take a more embracing form of Musar, and that's the Slobodka Musar of godless Adam, not katnas Adam. The man is great. The world has potential. Man is the pinnacle of creation, the masterpiece of creation. The world was created for man. Hashem wants a human being to participate and partake of this world and to channel and marshal its resources, become a better person, and serve Hashem in a more profound fashion. And that was Rabbi Tzadok's approach thousands of years ago. He didn't say, these women, they are disgusting and as odious to me as carcasses and ants and rodents. That's literally what Rabbi Akiva said. He wasn't afraid to show disrespect to his host or to these women, because he knew that was his mind space to avoid the chet for Rabbi Akiva. And again, what's fascinating is that none of these people, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tzadok, or Yosef HaTzadik, trust themselves just to say no. They all need a strategy. We need a strategy and we need many, many strategies. And all these, I'm sure there are times Yosef's strategy is valuable. Sometimes Rabbi Akiva's strategy is valuable. Tzadok's strategy is valuable. Li'olam, the Gemara says in Brachos, Adam Aram B'yira. You should be smart and sly and cunning, not sly and deceitful. But you have to think about it. You have to think about a strategy. You have to think about a policy. It's not just going to happen. If you leave it to its own dynamic, you're liable to fail. You're liable to slip. You're liable to deteriorate. So Rabbi Akiva's strategy was, they're nevelos and treifos. Rabbi Tzadok's strategy was, I come from Kohanim. Even if you're not a Kohen, just think about the pride of being a human being, the pride of being a Jew. I'm a Nivchar, and how much of that potential we all sacrifice every time we sin. And it's pasnish. It's beneath our dignity to barter all that eternity for a fleeting moment of pleasure. And of course, I wish and we wish we would internalize that message. So this is the story of Yosef in Mitzrayim, moral role models, his father's image, running away, not trusting your own valor. This is the story thousands of years later with Rabbi Tzadok and Rabbi Akiva, who took very different strategies from each other. Rabbi Akiva took the strategy, this is just something that's repulsive and ugly and nauseating to me. Rabbi Tzadok said, I don't have to degrade around me in order to celebrate what's within me. There's a story about the Or Sameach, who lived in Dvinsk, and every day he would walk home from shul, and he would take the same route home. He would travel by the mansion of the Gentile in town. Everyone looked up to him. He was a philanthropist, he was a philosopher, he was a kind person. And he would just sit and stare at the mansion. At some point, people came over and said, it's pasnish, you're the Gadol Hador, you're the Rav of Dvinsk, and you're sitting there looking at some goyish mansion. And Rabbi Simcha said, when I say Shalosani guy, I don't want to think about the guy who's drunk and vomiting in the streets. That I'm not that person. I want to think about the platonic guy, the ideal guy who maximizes his expectations. And it's still Asher Bachar Rabbanim Mikol Amim V'Nasan Lanu Es Torah. Sometimes I think in order to reaffirm or affirm and reinforce our own values, we tend to degrade other people rather than being more internal and celebrating other value systems for what they are, but more deeply appreciating the value system and the lifestyle that Hashem offered us. Shabbat Shalom.